Russell, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm a coral ID bod. I'm a science communicator who has a special interest in corals and coral identification. And basically, I'm a guy who couldn't use Corals of the World because it was arranged from A to Z and impossible to access. And so I invented a reverse engineered thing called the Coral Finder, which a lot of people in the aquarium scene use. But it's a shape or texture searchable tool that allows you to teach yourself Coral ID, because you can search for things that you can see and you can learn. Whereas I had great respect for Corals of the World and Charlie Vernon, but I couldn't use the tool to learn. Yeah. And so I invented that, and now we do workshops on that front, and to train people, but not so much to train people, but to show people that they can train themselves, they can learn themselves.
Right. I have the first version up on my shelf.
The plastic one.
Yeah. I took it underwater with me, and it had a big slate on it, right? So you could write your notes on it and stuff. Yeah. And it was pretty great. I enjoyed it very much. And the new one, I'm hoping to be able to take your workshops. We'll get to that in a second. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ben. What were you saying?
No, it's okay. We had an earlier episode. I can't think of which one it was off the top of my head, but we had Russell on an earlier episode. And since that time, we run a Discord, which is an online thing, and we have a community on there, and we call the people that are part of our community, we call them beefers. We had several beefers that went on to take the course. Oh. And man, I tell you what, and it's funny, they're still in our community. And there's a distinct difference. Anytime someone's like, hey, what is this? And those same people that I know took that course, they're just Johnny on the spot with naming them.
That was episode 76, if anybody wants to go back and look at that.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And thanks for that feedback, because the reason we do this is really to empower people, because you've got all this human energy, which the aquarium scene is just like one of those passion hobbies that's just driven by people who are, love what they do, and they love the tinkering aspect of it as well. But it's so frustrating when there isn't an easy to use or a good tool or good information, so that the energy you throw at something rewards you. And I hate it for the longest time with Coral ID. I would throw energy at it, but I'd never seem to get anywhere. And so this is what, BYO guides stands for Be Your Own Guide. And these tools are designed to be visually driven and accessible by interest and inquiry, by something like a shape or a texture or a form. It's not A to Z, and it's not Latin, it's not terminology. Basically, you can rock up to a coral and you can interrogate it, interview it by what it looks like. And that's a learning loop. And you might go back to things like Corals of the World because you've got your starting point from the Coral Finder. Or you might go to other online sources now, things like iNaturalist or the Marine Species website. But the thing is, they are still A to Z, but at least you've got a name to go into the A to Z with, and that you can have that formal learning to back up what the Coral Finder can do for you, which is get you into the right ballpark.
Yeah. So the workshops you've got coming up are November 23rd through the 26th of 2023 and January 19th through the 22nd, 2024. And you sign up at byoguides.com, right? And we'll put up a thing here with a QR code. And I'm hoping to be able to take one of these this time. It's in the middle of my spawning, so it gets really hard for me to have the energy to be there. They're great. It's 4-hour sessions, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean,
it's a bit of a Coral ID party rather than a Coral ID workshop. Right?
Okay.
Because it's very interactive, and because it is done by Zoom, occasionally, a lot of people turn their screens off, and so on. But occasionally people do leave their screens on, or they forget to turn them off, and you realize that people are sitting there having beers and enjoying themselves. So Coral ID party, works for me. Yeah.
Oh, let's call it that from now on. And so I understand what I use it for in the field, but for the hobby, this hobby, it seems like it'd be really great to take to the store with you, or when you're looking at pictures of coral online and you want to know what they actually are, because the IDs and the selling can be so bad. And you alluded to it, but you start from either shape or color or texture, right?
Yeah.
And
Growth forms, textures, and also lifestyle. Like, so a coral that is solitary versus one that's a colony, or a coral that has its tentacles out during the day, that's a lifestyle. And so you can search by lifestyle. So all the corals that do that are gathered together in a hierarchy on a page, so just on a few pages, and they're compared and contrasted. And there's a system in the Coral Finder which is text is in bold, and it has little superscript numbers that refer to arrows on the photos. So tip, as we call them, yeah. So when you read the short description, because there's not much room in the Coral Finder, there's just a paragraph you have to read, and the bits are in bold, and the little tip arrows on the photos are telling you what to look for. And so you go, oh, it should have this, this, and this, and then you can look, and you go, right. And then the ones you might be contrasting it with, you look at their tip arrows, their key characters, and you go, it hasn't got that. It hasn't got that. And so you're building confidence, and you're having reasons for your IDs. And this is the important thing, is to, with corals, there are so many things that kind of look quite similar. It's easy to shoot from the hip and say, oh, it looks like that. It's, pick a name. But in reality, when you look more closely, you'll find that there are subtle differences between these things. And the way to learn the subtle differences is to actually have a reason to go and check for the key characters. And the Coral Finder brings all the things that look the same together onto the same page, and it points out their key characters so you can compare and contrast them. But it's all done in plain language. So there's only 10 terms that you have to learn. So there's 10 simple terms. One of them is mouth, so it's not that hard. And the whole conversation you have with the Coral Finder is as plain language as it can be.
Well, it's going to be user friendly.
Yeah. And then the end result is that you get a coral genus. But the thing is, and people might go, well, I want to learn species. But the reality is that the best way to learn species is to learn to recognize the genus, because the genus is like a bucket for species, right? They're all, like all the dogs are in a genus, and they're different species, or sorry, that's dogs are a bad example. You know what I mean? Yeah. You've got a bunch of species, but they all share certain characters, which is what makes them part of a genus. Well, what the Coral Finder does is it shows you those unique characters that they all share. And when you learn that, you will begin to see the species. And that's the thing. It's like seeing the code in the Matrix, right? You kind of like, it takes a while, but once you see the code, you develop superpowers. And that's the important thing, is to have reasons for your IDs. And when you've got reasons, you can have a conversation with your friends, and you can say, I think it's this because X, Y, Z, as opposed to, nah, it's echinophilia. Done. No, we can actually sort of, together we can have that conversation. We can learn, and all sort of get a bit better at it, which is the mission.
In your guide, can a single coral have a couple different pathways to it? Like, here's an example: Heliofungia. It's going to be sitting solitarily, but it's also got large tentacles. So can you get there both ways?
Exactly. So you could just, if it didn't have its tentacles out, you could go, hey, it looks like it's free living. It's just sitting on the bottom. I bet if I turned it over. Yeah. But if it's got its tentacles out, you go down the large daytime tentacles pathway, and you end up at the same answer. And there are some corals that you can get to like 4 or 5 different ways using the coral finder. And it's that thing that just makes it so user friendly. And what happens is, like, you sometimes, you go, well, I get the coral finder's logic, which is what those 10 terms are about, sends you to a lookalike page. So these are pages of things that answer a question, which is at the top of the page here. And I'll have to just read this one. Thin plates, vases, or tiers. And so only things that have thin plates, vases, or tiers are on that page. But like if you say, oh, it looks like that, but I'm not really convinced. Well, you take the name and then you go to the index at the back and you find it in the index and you go, oh, that thing is actually on all these different pages. And so you can problem solve, you can reverse engineer things. And it means that if the coral finder gives you a hit, but it's not a perfect match, it'll let you jump around inside the system. And there's, I don't know how many photos in this thing, like well over 1,000 or something. It'll let you find a better option. So it's very forgiving like that. Yeah. Whereas if you ever done it the scientific way, which is like dichotomous keys, and you have these branching decisions and it's all Latin, and you decide, I'm going to go down that path, and that's it. It's all over if you're wrong. With the coral finder, you can.
There's things for academia, but then there's things for, just scuba divers or hobbyists or just the average person to understand what they're looking at without feeling intimidated from, some big thing meant for a marine biologist.
Yeah. And all the people where I live, it's a marine sort of science town. They all do the same workshops that we do them, obviously in person because they're local, but the grappling with the problem, it's just too big to keep all this stuff in your head. What you need is a user-friendly first step for people to learn the basics. And from there, they'll eventually, you sort of graduate from the coral finder, but you still don't keep all this stuff in your head. At some point, what you want, you keep the coral finder around because it's a quick way to get in the right ballpark and jog your memory, or that weird rare thing that I've only ever seen once in 10 years. The coral finder will help you get back to that thing. Now, you don't have to have it all front of mind all the time.
Is it mostly based on Great Barrier Reef or the Coral Sea or the Indo-Pacific? I mean, is it usable in the Caribbean?
Yeah, afraid not. It's an Indo-Pacific guide, and it would just be very confusing if we mixed them all together, which is funny. If you ever go to the Corals of the World website, all the Caribbean corals are all mixed up in amongst the Indo-Pacific corals, and there isn't sort of like a lot of pointers to remind you that that's the case.
Yeah. And there's so many fewer corals in the Atlantic, that I find that the ID issues in the Atlantic and Caribbean are easier to approach because there's just fewer options.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, but you go to the Indo and there's what is it, 500 species or 600 species of hard corals, and well, that was last time I looked. So that's got something to do with it. So maybe
it's again in that environment, in that situation, it's overwhelming. A lot of people just throw their hands up and say this is too hard, and it's not that it's too hard. It's just that it's unfriendly, and the purpose of what we do with BYO guides, like we have another book which my mission in life is to try and be more friendly, to communicate scientific information, which is just there. It just needs to be packaged in a friendlier way. We did our first workshop in Fiji, and just realized instantly that people haven't all grown up watching David Attenborough documentaries. They don't all know what corals are from their point of view. A lot of people thought corals were rocks. And so we had to develop a new tool, which was a thing called the Group Finder, but now we call it the Reef Finder. And it lets you search, like there's an index there to tentacles, all the shapes of tentacles that you might see on a typical dive or on a reef. And so you can search by holes, you can search by spirals, you can search by shapes, and it just lets people get past that first step of all this unfamiliar, very interesting but totally unfamiliar gunge that's sitting on the seafloor, on a typical coral reef.
And both those are available at byoguides.com, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you can use them without the workshop. If you can't.
Well, that's the whole point. That's what they're designed for. With because people often come to, I do get a lot of people coming to the workshops who have a need, like it could be students who are doing, marine biology, but it's often other people like everything from coral collectors who have to abide by regulations, customs and CITES people, who are, dealing with import regulations, people in the supply chain, the aquarium supply chain, wholesalers, retailers,
vacationers.
A lot of these people, sorry, say again.
Vacationers.
Oh, well, just everyone from recreational aquarists all the way through to people who just are passionate naturalists who just want to know what it is they're looking at, and they don't have to be scuba people, and like I say, you can be looking through glass, and the glass might be vertical looking into your tank, or you can be looking down through a face mask in a shallow snorkeling sort of situation. But what sets the really good people apart from the people who are not quite as good is just a eyesight, really. And attention to detail. If you're one of these kind of people who can see detail and focus on detail, they are the people who kind of are just ahead of the pack a little bit. And we had a guy in Fiji who had never been to school, had worked in a clam farm for 30 years, thought the corals were rocks, and didn't know how to use, never seen a computer, and he got 0 out of 15 for the prior knowledge quiz, and he got 15 out of 15 at the end because he had incredible eyesight. He just could see the detail, he could see the patterns, and so that's the only sort of advantage. Like getting old glasses is means.
I guess he eats a lot of carrots.
Prescription face masks for Russell now.
Yeah. I got bifocals because my reading's gone. So I got bifocal face mask, and it's I brought when I was checking for spawn, I just brought several magnifying glasses so I could crack and get right up on it and see, because from here it's like I don't know if there's eggs.